Welcome to Choose Civility, Allegheny County's podcast series, which we offer to complement other efforts to champion choosing civility to enrich Allegheny County by promoting civil conversations and kindness toward others. This second annual podcast discussion is being convened by Frostburg State University's Communication Leadership Lab. This podcast series will explore ways to support civil discourse, even in the presence of interpersonal conflict, competing notions of common sense, or ideological differences. The stories and strategies we share are designed to keep the conversation going, to support community collaboration and problem solving, and to enhance personal and professional relationships. I'm Elisha Rominsky, Professor of Communication and Leadership Studies at Frostburg State University, coordinator of the Communication Leadership Lab, and a member of the Allegheny County Choose Civility Chapter Steering Committee. In this episode, we ask, how can we model and hold others accountable to engage in civil political discourse that helps us to address our shared local and national challenges? How do we move away from threats and manipulation toward engaging constructively in controversy or conflict with civility? In other words, how can we transform how we communicate to get unstuck from divisive political rhetoric that keeps us from solving our collective challenges? For 2022's Choose Civility Allegheny County Chapter's Day of Civility, we are thrilled to have some participants with local ties join us to participate in this discussion about civil political discourse. I'm happy to collaborate on this effort with colleagues, students, and alumni from Frostburg State, along with community members, to convene and facilitate this intimate opportunity to share and create understanding about what civil political discourse can be at a time when we most need to reflect collectively on civility and bridge divides to work together in our region and nation. Today, we will consider how we will bridge different approaches and differences of opinion by applying the principles of civility in our formal and informal conversations about politics. We have a range of conservative and liberal perspectives represented through the participants who are part of this conversation. Let's begin with a round of introductions. First, let me introduce our participants. I'm joined here today by Justin Brick, Frostburg State University Communication Studies Senior and Communication Leadership Lab Assistant. RJ Castor, FSU alumnus and CEO of Techne Media. Colin Cregan, FSU Junior Mass Communication major. Tanya Gomer, FSU alumna and grants manager and pretrial risk assessment coordinator at the Allegheny County Sheriff's Office and Detention Center. Professor Tim McGrath, associate professor of political science and director of the Bell Institute for Public Affairs. And Patrick O'Brien, alumnus of FSU and director of FSU's Office of Civic Engagement. Our discussion will be facilitated by two local journalists, Delaney Blueball, editor of the FSU Bottom Line, and Todd Lassa, founding editor of The Hustings. They'll draw on prepared questions that have been reviewed by the participants. We might have time for a few additional questions, but this is really a conversation, and we are going to then connect the conversation back to the periodicals that these journalists are tied to. Delaney and Todd, could you tell us about yourselves briefly and what your periodicals are about?
Sure. Hello, I am Delaney Bluebaugh. I'm a senior political science student and also serve as the editor-in-chief of The Bottom Line, Frostburg State University's independent student newspaper. The Bottom Line is student-run and features many of the happenings in student life, campus, and throughout the campus community, as well as gives student writers the opportunity to cover national and international events. I'm excited to be a part of this Choose Civility Allegheny County podcast on behalf of TBL today. Like the hustings, there will be a feature about this conversation on the Bottom Line's website, thebottomlinenews.com, once the podcast is available today to enjoy. And we hope to continue this conversation for this year's Day of Civility. Todd?
I'm Todd Lassa, founding editor of the Hustings, a political news and commentary website that seeks to promote civil debate with a 3-column format that presents conservative and liberal opinion on the same page. So this is a discussion pre-recorded, but we want to continue the dialogue and allow listeners to write into the hustings and contribute their opinions, left or right. We will post a center column story on this podcast on Friday, April 8th, and we invite all listeners and participants to continue the discussion via our website, thehustings.news. That's THEHUSTING.news. Send your reactions and comments to editors at thehustings.news and keep it civil. Let us know whether you think you belong in the right or the left column.
Thank you, Delaney and Todd. So to help you better know who our participants are, we are going to ask them to do a self-introduction briefly, and then we'll get to our questions that Delaney and Todd are going to ask. So let's start with Justin Brick.
All right, so hi everybody. My name's Justin Brick. As Dr. Minsky said, I'm a senior here at FSU. I am a communication studies major with a double minor in leadership and public relations. And I'm just really excited for this opportunity to kind of voice my opinions. I've been working with Todd and Dr. Minsky for a while now, collaborating on this podcast and then the follow-up from it. And I'm just excited to get it going.
Thank you, Justin. And RJ.
Hey, y'all. RJ Castor. I'm currently CEO of Techna Media and currently kind of specialize in data psychographic research and then targeted digital advertising. I started out, I went to Frostburg State back in 2008 and graduated and did the Bell Institute, worked on the Hill for Congressman Roscoe Bartlett, and who represented Western Maryland for a number of years. And then after that, got involved in political campaigns against my better judgment and have been doing that ever since.
Thank you, RJ. Colin, can you introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, I'm Colin. I'm a junior here at Frostburg University, and I'm excited to be here. I don't know much about this topic, but I'm excited to voice my opinion and to learn more about this.
That's great. Thank you, Colin. And Tanya Gomer, could you tell us about yourself?
Yes, Tanya Gomer. I currently work for Allegheny County government with the Sheriff's Office and Detention Center. I went to Frostburg State many moons ago. I won't say how long ago. Did a double major in political science and law and society with a legal studies concentration, and then got my master's in public administration thereafter. I currently am the president of the Allegheny County Republican Women's Club, and I'm also the chair of the Leadership Allegheny Alumni Committee, which is tied to our local Chamber of Commerce. I'm excited to be here. I think we need to do more across the aisle conversations to teach people that we don't have to fight. We can actually have a civil conversation, and civil discourse is what has made this country so great through our last 200 years.
Thank you, Tanya. That's inspiring. And Professor McGrath.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Tim McGrath. I'm an instructor of political science at Frostburg State University and also the executive director of the Bell Institute of Public Affairs. The Bell Institute's focus is trying to engage our students in political affairs and public affairs, but also in civil discourse, and to also provide opportunities to get them involved in public service, as RJ did interning with Congressman Bartlett. I've been teaching at Frostburg for 15 years. And prior to that, I worked for 25 years for Congress. And my first year of Congress was when I flew up from Miami, where I grew up in 1976. I was a page there when I was 15. And similar to RJ's experience, I got hooked on the political bug. And from there, when I went to graduate school at the American University, I started work for the House of Representatives. And I worked for 15 years on Capitol Hill with an office in the U.S. Capitol and with White House security clearance. So I worked on the Hill, and then I was dog driven and found a home in Allegheny County and sought work there. And I ended up working for the United States Senator Paul Sarbanes, where I represented him in 4 westernmost counties, from Frederick County to Garrett County, working with a whole host of public officials, including the sheriff's department, including all sorts of mayors and city councilwomen, and of course, state legislators as well. But my heart is at the university, and I'm just very glad to be here tonight.
Thank you, Tim. And Patrick O'Brien.
Hi, everyone. I'm Patrick O'Brien. I'm currently the Director of Civic Engagement at Frostburg State University, and came to Frostburg State University in 2002 as a student, working on my business degree. And during that time, got involved in service and volunteerism, and eventually got into this role. The Office of Civic Engagement works closely with the Bell Institute for Public Affairs and focuses on getting students involved in the community, giving back to their community, as well as getting involved in democratic engagement, voter engagement, and voter turnout. So a lot of the programs that we focus on really do focus on this concept of civility and encouraging people to learn about these issues, as well as have conversations with each other, open dialogue about the issues that impact them, and how they can work together to come to solutions for some of the bigger problems in the world. So.
All right, thank you, Patrick, and thank you all for being part of this. We are going to move into a Q&A kind of an experience where we will have one of our two journalists ask a question to a specific person and open it for others to respond, and continue through that process for a little bit and have some more open questions for anyone to respond to. Really, we just want to have a conversation though. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Delaney, to begin.
Thank you, Dr. Rominsky. I'd like to pose this question first to Justin, and then others, please feel free to jump in. Justin, how do you choose civility in contentious discussions and arguments about politics? And who taught you to engage in a civil manner during tough conversations and conflicts?
Yeah, thank you, Delaney. I would say that with the way social media is planned out nowadays, there is a lot of that back and forth that kind of turns, I would not violent, obviously, because it's online, but turns more violent and nitpicky rather than searching for those solutions. So my dad was actually the first one who kind of taught me, I would say right from wrong. And the way he did that, excuse me, the way he did that was kind of to point out, it goes back to that old saying, treat everyone the way you want to be treated. And I think in our country, a lot of that has gone away. And I think that the rise of social media has kind of played into that. But I would say the best way to go about it is to have this type of open discourse that we're having right now and be able to talk through solutions rather than kind of nitpick different things from different sides where everyone's just kind of pointing fingers back and forth, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely. Thank you, Justin, for that answer. Would anyone else like to respond?
So
I would go ahead, Patrick, sorry.
So in thinking about that question, thinking about the second part of that, who taught you to engage in a civil manner? I think that the best way to learn how to do that is through practice. And I know when I was in school here at Frostburg State, me and my friends would have conversations about what was going on in the world or what we thought about different things, and often had difference of opinions throughout the group. But because we were friends, we talked about it, we educated each other. We often argued, so there's definitely arguments there, but we did so with, obviously with respect for each other because we were friends. So I think growing up and having that the whole time is what, helps people as they get into some of the bigger conversations about civil discourse and especially when it comes to politics. So taking the time to practice that with those that are around you, some of the best conversations I've had are with people of different of opinion, because it's a fun conversation to have. Talking with somebody about, your exact views and that align directly with you is just kind of reiterating what you were already thinking. But having that discourse with somebody that has a different viewpoint is always great. So.
Thank you, Patrick.
Yeah, Patrick.
Professor McGrath. Oh,
what I was going to say.
No problem.
What I was going I think to a certain degree, most of my career working for Congress, I saw civility. I saw sort of, not caustic political discourse. I think this caustic political discourse is reasonably recent innovation. And I hate to put it on any one person, but I would suggest it was Newt Gingrich, and he succeeded at it. He's the election in 1994. He passed out CDs and so forth, and told the people that he was counseling to basically attack, Democrats at that time with very sort of caustic language, and he succeeded. He got 60 seats, took over the House of Representatives. But when I first started working for Congress, there was civility. There was conservative Democrats, and there were very liberal Republicans, and they were across the board. They worked together. Most of them lived in Washington, and knew their families, and barbecues together and so forth. And one of the first rules of the House of Representatives, I think it was Sam Rayburn said, is disagree without being disagreeable, and never make politics personal. There's so many people I love. There's so many conservatives in this county that I consider them great friends, and I would never think that the differences in our political views somehow is going to split that apart.
Thank you to both Patrick and Professor McGrath for responding. Tanya, would you like to add anything?
Yes, thank you, Delaney. I would like to add that the person that kind of gave me the foundation for everything as far as having these conversations with civility was my high school teacher, Clyde Bance. He taught a course called Contemporary World Issues, and the entire class was structured on debate. And he would first look at you and assess your viewpoint, but then your assignment would be you had to have the counter argument. So it really got down to the root of things, is looking at things from both perspectives. And that not only opens up the opportunity to see the point of view from the other side, but it can also help reinforce your own personal beliefs of why you believe things based on the knowledge from why the other side thinks the way or feels the way they do. And I totally agree with Professor McGrath that we need to take feeling, emotion out of politics. That seems to be the thing that drives people to the point of it just becomes a shouting match, or it just becomes, okay, just throw out an insult and end the conversation, where those emotions, they're not based on reality or fact, or there's no real foundation for their basis. And another one is Scott Johnson. He did the same thing to me in college and always put me on the opposing viewpoint. And it really was a challenge, but I learned a lot more because I had to research and get a lot of the fact base behind why people, align themselves with certain political viewpoints.
Thank you, Tanya, for that answer. I'll go ahead and put it over to Todd now for the next question.
Thank you, Delaney. Tanya, we're going to start with you again, just after you spoke. So I'd like to ask you this question. Can you share an example of how you had to remain civil in your discourse in order to solve problems in our region, even though it was difficult to do so? What helped make that problem solving through communication work?
I think probably the most recent would be working on a particular grant application for a project that focused more on providing services in the community and less on supporting the law enforcement perspective. Coming from the background of law enforcement, I really feel like we need more law and order. We need more time for law enforcement to have out on the road. But then the compromise we came to after discussion was that we needed to have a more holistic approach. And we kind of backpedaled the law enforcement side and focused more on the service component, and primarily dealt with the opioid epidemic and providing those extension of services for free to individuals that were in an incarcerated state, which is one of my titles. So I actually run the program. for pretrial services, and it's a free program that allows individuals to be released until their next bail date, their next court date, under the supervision of alternative sentencing. And they would pay nothing for that, unlike in parole and probation, where those individuals have to pay a fee to be on that release status.
So that new kind of funding kind of reflects some of the changes that have been discussed in law enforcement in the last few years.
Absolutely, it has changed the direction of law enforcement to more of a service-based community policing agency instead of the traditional, traffic enforcement, lock them up, throw away the key mentality of years gone by. So we have transitioned, and we're still transitioning, and it's a good opportunity. And I'm thankful that to be from a community like Allegheny County, where we are so closely connected, that those interpersonal relationships, aside from political views, help facilitate those relationships going forward on projects like this.
It's a really great example. Thank you, Tanya. Anybody else on this question? Yes, Tim, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Todd. I was kind of struck by when I left a rather partisan position on Capitol Hill. I moved to a rather conservative area in Western Maryland where most of the public officials were Republican. And I realized at that point that partisanship was overrated. People want to get things done. And if you know somebody personally, it's hard to get caustic or hard to get partisan with them. You ask about their kids, and overall partisanship doesn't really matter. I think, especially at the local and the state level, I think it's gotten worse. Don't get me wrong, but by and large, people, what's politics is about how people get along, and to see each other as life. We're part of the United States, not we're part of blue states or red states. We're here together. And it makes life so much easier when you see a person for who they are and not for what their political stripes are.
It kind of goes back to, for someone your age, my age, to the Ronald Reagan, Tip O'Neill era, doesn't it?
Exactly. That's what I'm thinking of. When they shared a whiskey at the end of the day or played cards together, or, that was what was important, and not who won the last debate or whatever. It was what the personal relationships are all about.
Thank you, Tim. Anyone else on this issue, on this question?
Yeah, Todd, if I could chime in here, and thank you, Tim. I'm gonna go off Tim's point there. I think that it's that sort of mutual respect that has kind of consistently been dropped where those party lines are concerned. And just like Tim said, blue states, red states were one. And I do think that conversations like these and increasing different types of this civil political discourse will bring us back to having that mutual respect between parties, where you don't see someone as a conservative or as a Democrat or a liberal or a Democrat. You just see them as another person who may have different views than you, but you can work from there and build upon that.
Thank you, Justin. Anyone else? Let me toss it back to Delaney. Take it away, Delaney.
Thank you, Todd. And Justin, you bring up a really great point about mutual respect that actually leads into our next question for Professor McGrath. So Professor McGrath, how do we get the civil political discourse on track when we can't even agree on the facts behind our opinions? For example, how do we tackle, the COVID pandemic or redistricting? How might shared values play a role in that?
Well, thank you, Delaney. You bring up my passion in terms of wanting to change the world. And it does come down to, in many cases, a structural problem that we're having. I would say that it's gerrymandering or redistricting. It's where basically partisans are drawing districts, Democrats in Maryland, Republicans in Ohio and Pennsylvania and other places. They're drawing legislative districts that are completely safe for one party or the other. And that's true even in states that are divided. The incumbents come together and they split the differences and they create legislative safe districts. Why is that a problem? It's because America is made up, the vast majority of people are in the middle. They're moderates. The fringes on the liberals on the left and the conservatives on the right, they're minuscule compared to the vast majority of voters or citizens that are in the middle. And by creating legislative safe districts, and then we have things like closed primaries, is the primaries are basically allowing the extremes of each party to elect the extremes because they don't face any sort of challenge from the other party. And the moderate, the middle voters in the middle don't have a voice. And so the leaders cater to the fringes. And of course, leaders lead. And when leaders lead, they also bring people along with them. We see that in Ukraine right now, or Russia, I should say, where the average Russian thinks that this is a liberating experience because that Putin says that. And likewise, we have a third of America, or maybe not that large, but a group of people out there that think that the democratic process did not work in November, and that somehow their leader was cheated and stolen because it's been repeated over and over again. Our leadership matters. And so I think to a certain degree, we need to create competitive legislative districts where the middle of the road matters, not the fringes. And that way people are fighting to bring their side to the other side. And without competitive legislative districts, I think we're in trouble. Likewise, at the presidential level, I somehow think it's important that the party speaks too. And the party, there should be some sort of maybe pre-clearance for candidates, because with closed primaries, it tends to basically cater to the extreme of each party. And we're not getting the people in the middle represented. So sorry about this gerrymandering issue, but I think it's your issue, Delaney, and all these other young people in this call. It's important that we resolve this issue and create competitive legislative districts.
Absolutely. And thank you for that answer. I think you bring up a really great point that, a lot of power doesn't rest in the middle where it should, or where the majority and the moderacy is. Would anyone else like to speak to that or answer the question?
Yeah, I think I might take a crack at that real quick.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Delaney. There's a line that Leo Strauss has when he's talking about liberal democracy, and it's called that liberal democracy is built on low but solid ground, and that's what makes it so important to preserve, right? Because it is lower than what he thought some of the other regimes might be, but it's solid, right? We had a unifying factor, and for the United States, it wasn't anything based on what color you were, what your family was, what your religion was, but it was actually kind of like that the set ideals, those Lockean ideals that were supposed to be enshrined in the Declaration, right? And over the course of time, though, we've kind of seen that like this solid ground now that was already kind of low to begin with has kind of been getting chipped away, right? And then on top of that, we don't have a unifying element anymore. Part of that's because, to the point of the question, we don't agree on things like what's true, what's not true, what are shared values, what are our shared goals as a country, things along those lines. And as a result, there's no real compass for us to reach an agreement. We wouldn't even know if we did reach an agreement, because what ends up happening is that we end up fighting down in the lower levels about tactics as opposed to agreeing about strategy. And so I think that one of the things that we really need to start doing as a country is to take a page out of the book of marriage counseling is that you try to get folks to agree to something that's bigger than the argument at stake currently. And that's right now, there's a lot of talk about a great divorce in the United States and whether or not there's going to be a civil war, whether or not, folks just are not going to be able to come together. So like something like that, like an understanding like that, trying to figure out how we would go ahead and unify two people who are fighting about something is going to be kind of key to figuring out how we're going to get the two increasingly polarized sides of our political balance back unified towards a common goal.
Thank you, RJ, for that interesting take. I think you bring up a really great point about unity and what will unify us. And, I think that's a question that a lot of people are asking nowadays, especially seeing, how political discourse is not being, positive. There aren't many positive outcomes. I'm going to pass it over to Todd for the next question.
Thank you, Delaney. And I'm going to start with Patrick on this next question, but of course, open to anybody. What strategies can we use, Patrick, to support First Amendment speech rights alongside a more united way of communicating in the United States? In other words, how do we work to communicate a shared reality where there are so many diverse perceptions of reality across the US to solve shared problems?
So, and I think this goes back to what RJ was saying, and I would take it to an even a bigger picture is not just that we aren't agreeing on what direction we should go in as a country or what our values are, but that we truly have gotten to a point where we don't agree on what reality is. And it's hard to have civil discourse. It may even be impossible when what you are fighting for or arguing for is in two different realities. We've gotten to a point where we don't all agree in the same science, or we don't all agree. My favorite being that the world is not flat, and how that's come back. So to really get to a point where we're able to have this civil discourse, or even get to a point where we can start to agree on, like what RJ was saying, these concepts of, what direction should our country be going in. First, we need to, agree with where we are. And I don't think that we do that at this point. So as far as getting there, once we begin to or be able to talk to each other and start to agree on the basics of where we stand, what our reality is, I think at that point we can then really start to have those conversations of, okay, now where do we go and why? And that's what politics has normally been about in the past, is people with different opinions about how we should tackle a problem and what solution we should utilize has really been what the focus of politics and how we go about that. We've had the more conservative side and the more liberal side working on the same problems. Now we're to a point where it seems like those two sides are working on different problems and different realities. So one of the biggest things in working, in appreciating free speech is understanding that there are those differences of opinions, right? So even if you may not agree with somebody, taking the time to learn what it is that they believe in and why they believe in it is important. But in order to do that, everybody also has to self-reflect on the concept of, is what you're saying based in what reality is? So this concept of alternative facts that came out years ago is, I think, where this really started to go south. So taking your own opinions out and looking at them and reviewing them and really taking to heart what other people believe and how they want to tackle a problem, and seeing if that is something that fits in with your solution or a compromise that can be made is important. But the big part of all this is we have to start at the same baseline. We all have to agree with where we are before we can really start to see where we want to be and how we want to get there.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Patrick. Who else would like to speak to this?
I would, Todd.
Go ahead, Tanya. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's very difficult to say that we all have to start from the same place because we're not all in the same place. And I think that is the biggest reality that we need to come into, is that my reality is based on my life experiences, the interactions I've had with different people, which would be very different from probably Patrick or RJ or anyone else on the call, because I have had 10 years in the military. I've been overseas. I've been in a lot of these countries. I have engaged people from every race, creed, denomination. I worked in public education. I worked in law enforcement. So my life experiences put me in a far different place than someone else who has never had those experiences. So I think just knowing that and embracing that helps come to have those discussions and that dialogue.
Thank you, Tanya. Anyone else on the question? Yeah, Patrick, back to Patrick.
So Tanya, I agree 100%. And I think that everybody's experiences and their lives and what they've chosen to do with it is a huge impact on that. I think what I was talking about when I talked about reality is much more of a baseline that's much, even below that of, are we believing in the same science, right? One of the biggest things looking at COVID is even when reports would come out is how people interpreted them and these kind of things. So no, I think experience, especially when you're talking about being in the military, your viewpoints on what we're doing over in Ukraine right now have a much more grounded understanding than what mine would, because I was never involved in the military. So no, I agree with you 100% that that what we go through and our experiences shape who we are and shape what we want to see. My concern is that we're even before that, before we get to that, we're starting in kind of different worlds, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Patrick. RJ. You're
Thanks,
up, RJ.
Thanks, Todd. So there's a psychological concept called reframing. And I feel that we have collectively lost the ability to reframe other people's arguments or their opinions, and reframing is essentially where somebody tells you something and then you say it back to them during the course of an argument to show that you understand. And we don't do that anymore, or it's become out of practice, because this might be thanks to things like Crossfire and Hardball and all that, right? Where, it was no longer about firing line and William F. Buckley having Noam Chomsky on and saying, so what you're telling me is that this is the way that you see things. And instead, we now have, screw what you're saying, because I'm going to talk louder than you, and I'm going to force my part or my opinion against yours, as opposed to taking yours in and then using it to inform my opinion. And so the First Amendment doesn't become such a problem if we get better at being able to listen to other people who have opposing viewpoints, ingest them, say them back to the people who gave us those viewpoints in the way that understanding people the way they understand themselves, as opposed to how you want to understand them to, destroy their argument, and then giving your counter argument, but at least showing them that, like, I understand you, because there's an empathetic element there, because you're empathizing with why they are making the statement that they're making. They have the opinion that they have. They've lived the experiences that they've lived. Dave Chappelle says it best when he talks about getting quote unquote canceled because of the jokes that he was making about certain communities. And he said, look, we're all living the human experience, period, at the end. And so what he did was kind of take it into a broader reframing. And I think that that's something that a lot of us, especially in the political world, could probably exercise a little bit more robustly.
And RJ, just something to tag onto that I think is important. When you utilize that concept of reframing, it also really helps weed out misunderstanding. So when you say to somebody that, so what you're saying is this, they have the opportunity to then say, no, you weren't understanding it. What I really meant was this. And I think that misunderstanding or misinterpreting each other's opinions is what leads to a lot of discourse.
I'd like to direct this next question to Colin. Colin, is cancel culture a real thing or a rhetorical device? And how do we discuss it to promote civil political discourse? How can we change the way we communicate to free ourselves from the sort of divisive political rhetoric that keeps us from solving our collective challenges? Any thoughts?
Lenny, thank you. I do believe cancel culture is real because I have been seeing some of it like on YouTube, and I feel like they are really trying to, I guess, they're trying to make a big fuss about certain, I guess, topics or I guess certain children's shows that may be kind of forgotten, and they're trying to kind of put so much attention that they just kind of kick it out. So I think that they're definitely a real thing, and they're definitely trying to push their kind of aggressive approach to kind of canceling certain cartoon shows or the way some characters will act when watching a certain show, like Family Guy, seeing a bunch of violence or sex related stuff. They're going to make a giant fuss about that and kind of focus just their attention on that. And they seem to just have a giant hone in on a bunch of different topics, and they'll kind of just say all this stuff, like go on social media about it, like Twitter, and I think they'll just make a giant fuss and have other people get heated on it, because what I've noticed is on cancel culture, a lot of people tend to get either insulted or really tense about it because it may have hurt something that they've enjoyed watching when they were like kids, and they want to kind of fight it back. So I guess it's like a back and forth battle of getting rid of something that is old, and they want to bring in something new and focus more on something that's more, I guess, more current. And others want to kind of bring back the old because some people don't like out with the old, in with the new. So I feel like it's kind of a giant battle of that combination from what I've seen. And I feel like for us to kind of communicate it, I think what we should do is, I feel like, I know a lot of people have opinions about this, and I feel like some people have to realize that you can't bring back every old show or cartoon or anything that you liked in the past, because we have to focus on the future. And I know some people, that can be hard for them to let go. So I think letting go is hard for some people, and that's why they get offended, is they don't like that something old is getting taken away and something new is kind of being put in. So I think just accepting the fact that we have to move on, and I'm sorry, I'm kind of just thinking as I go on.
No, that's good. It makes sense. Can you think of any examples? Specifically, you mentioned Family Guy, I think.
Yeah, that show, when I've watched, it's just a lot of violence and that, I guess, offends people because they think it's too violent. Seeing a lot of guns or sex content, a lot of people, it's too intense. They don't want their kids to see that when they're young. And so I think parents are I guess, as a kind of a big group of getting rid of content like that, because they want current content that I guess is more appropriately driven, where it's not as inappropriate. So I guess people want more appropriate sort of content, and cancel culture wants to definitely cut the inappropriate stuff and focus more on the appropriate content, to where it's not going to offend or hurt anyone. Because I know that some people can get like really heated about certain content or inappropriateness. They think, oh, it's too much, and it can be. But if it's gonna be inappropriate to like a young audience, like kids, then that should not really be something they should watch. I mean, parents, they do have the right idea. They should not allow kids to have inappropriate content seen. So I guess going in with the new is better than coming back with the old, even though it's hard. We have to we have to accept that as a reality. That's what I think about cancel culture from what I've seen and heard.
Thank you, Colin. Tanya, would you like to jump in there?
Thank you, Delaney. Cancel culture is a relatively new phenomenon that has been exponentially exacerbated by social media. Social media has allowed anyone with a device to stand back and say, cancel this, cancel that, I'm offended. But cancel culture in and of itself goes against our fundamental freedoms and our fundamental rights. If you don't like something, don't like it. But that doesn't mean it has to be cultured or canceled from everybody else because someone else could like it. So I think that is where cancel culture gets dangerous, is that we are going by a mob mentality of who's going to yell the loudest and have the highest pitchforks running out into the street saying, cancel this, cancel this, cancel this, when we're really not thinking about the long range consequences of what we're doing as a society, because we are basically attacking everything our country stands for, of having people with different beliefs, different freedoms, different thoughts. And when we start canceling them, then aren't we going into a dangerous mindset that's very similar to what we're seeing in Russia with propaganda, in China with propaganda, that we are censoring what people are exposed to because of cancel culture.
Thank you, Tanya. Would anyone else like to add anything to Tanya's point or answer the question otherwise? Professor McGrath?
Well, yeah, I'm relatively new to this argument about cancel culture, but I know, I have a semblance of understanding, but I think it comes down to kind of what RJ said earlier about marriage counseling, and that we have to understand the big picture rather than, the small fights. So, on the left or on the right, it's critical race theory. On the left, it's whoever. But we're all trying to attack each other using some of these different things. And to me, it's like understanding. I'm always disturbed when I ask the question, do you trust your government? And this generation, or most recent last 10 years, most students don't raise their hand. They don't believe in the United States. They have kind of a poor understanding of what the United States stands for and for what it is, and all its blemishes and all its greatnesses. And I think if we come back to the whole notion of teaching our children and teaching society the fact that we are kind of an exceptional country and one of the strongest economic mights in the world and provide great freedoms. And I don't think the average American kind of really can understand how terrific we are as a country. And if we get back to the basis of understanding what the United States is, it's a multi-pot pot of not only races and religions and so forth, but ideas as well. And we have to see the bigger picture. And if you don't want to hear about slavery and how African Americans were treated through 250 years, well, don't read it. Don't take the course or whatever. In the same way, like Tanya said, if you don't agree with what's on TV, turn the damn channel. And but our country is made up of this. I mean, that's what makes us strong. It is that diversity of thought. It's a diversity of religions and ethnicities and gender and so forth. That's what makes us. I think if we get back to that root of understanding our country, and I think what I'm trying to suggest here is that we put a greater emphasis on civics and understanding our nation. And most of my students, when they come to my class, the last time they had any kind of government class was in the 9th grade. And and young people in many cases don't vote. That might be one of the reasons as well, but I think we really need to reinstill what the American experiment's all about. And so this generation and previous generations understand, that we are exceptional. We're not, Russia, or we're not a failed state. We have greater things to achieve.
Thank you, Professor McGrath. Tanya, you still have your hand up. Did you want to?
I did, thank you.
Okay.
Just to kind of add on to what Professor McGrath said, what I think makes the United States so exceptional is that if I move to Germany, that doesn't make me German. If I move to Russia, I don't become Russian. But anybody can move to the United States and become an American. And I think we have lost that over the years. We have lost, the last time we were unified as a nation to really appreciate the United States was after 9/11. And that's sad. And before that, I can't even think of when, probably back in the Reagan era during the Cold War. But it took such a dramatic tragedy to unite this country. And I think we are now on a downward spiral. And exactly what Professor McGrath said is, I think we need more civics. I think we need more interaction with younger people and consistent interaction. Ninth grade LSF government, the way it's taught, doesn't really get into political discourse or get into the roots of what this nation's about. It skims the surface on so many topics that I think they should take American Constitutional Law 1 and 2 as a high school senior and understand what this country's about before they are eligible to vote. That's just my personal opinion, because it's sad that we put an immigrant through the rigors to become citizens, and our own born and bred don't go through the same vetting process. I have a very good friend of mine that came here from Africa, and the process that he went through to become a US citizen was so rigorous and took so much from him. And our policies failed him to some degree. And he is thankful every day for the opportunity to be here whenever he sees what happens to people that are from his village. So I think we just really need to focus more on the youth and young people to look at what this nation is all about, the good, the bad, and the ugly, because canceling things we don't like doesn't make them not true or not have happened. And I think that's the part of cancel culture that is dangerous, is when we stop telling the whole truth, going back to what Patrick had said earlier about that, what's reality. When we cancel things just because we don't like them, that will lead us down a very, very scary path, because we will forget the mistakes that were made that got us there in the first place.
Thank you, Tanya, for that point. I'll pass it over to Todd.
Thank you, Delaney. And now kind of a softball for Justin. This ought to be really easy. Our uncivil discourse has gotten to the point where we have to ask this question: how do we set the bar to avoid or decrease manipulation and threats of violence in our political discourse so we can engage all sides of issues constructively? What are the structural or policy issues that make it harder to adapt civil discourse, and how can we address those?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Todd. I would say some of those examples of policy issues and different civil things that kind of create that type of separation are different opinions on criminal justice system, death penalty, drug policy, gun control, stuff like that. Different societal issues, abortion, civil rights, stuff like that. And I think we kind of keep coming back to this overlying topic of mutual respect and kind of understanding the other people's why. I think that's a big thing that's kind of been lost in translation, is you can disagree with the person for sure, and you can have a different opinion and you can voice your own opinion, but it's important to understand their why, the reasoning that they think that way. And again, once you understand that, you don't have to change your opinion to agree with them, but it's important to be able to understand everyone else's why, to understand why they're saying things maybe in the tone that they are, maybe the specific actions that they're pointing out over others. Mainly things that I feel get lost in translation when we don't understand the people's why for doing things.
Thank you, Justin. Who else would like to speak to this? RJ, you're up next.
Thank you, Todd. I want to start off with saying I'm just happy to hear that people are still watching Family Guy 25 years later. I'm going to go back to the cancel culture question because that made me happy to hear that there is actually longevity in this world. But one of the questions that we have a little bit of historical narcissism, and there's a part of me that asks myself, are we more violent now than we were in the past? Like we joked about Hamilton and Burr, the duel. We joke about like Preston Brooks beat Charles Sumner with a cane in the Capitol over a disagreement in the lead up to the Civil War. There was a shooting in the House galleries in the 50s by Puerto Rican nationalists. We've had presidents who have been shot, and then activists like Martin Luther King who have been shot. So are we truly more violent in our political discourse? Like, I mean, is it truly a more violent time? We talk about cancel culture, and one of the things that I think has been interesting is that we have a little bit of this privilege in the West of being so tied to technology that being canceled via technology is like an existential threat to our being. And one of the things that has been interesting to see unfold, if I can get into a little bit of the international relations realm, is that folks like Putin, and folks like the bad actors in the Middle East, they don't care about social media, and they know that social media doesn't mean anything. And that's another thing that, in a weird way, Trump also figured out, that he can leverage social media, but also like it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter in the end. It's not really truly an existential threat to anybody unless you make it. It's kind of like those scary horror movies where the bad guy only can hurt you if you believe that the bad guy exists. And that's kind of what social media is to a degree. So we kind of sit here and we go, oh my God, I'm threatened if I have like these views that are, different than everybody else's or whatnot. But are we truly, or is that something that we're conjuring up because we kind of have a little bit of this prevalence of a victim mentality in the West in recent years? And do we truly appreciate what it's like to actually live somewhere where if you have a dissenting opinion, that could lead to bad ramifications for yourself or your family? So I kind of come at this from both ways. I think cancel culture is stupid. I think that it's bullying. It's a weird way to try to feel like you're like this Nietzschean Übermensch, right? Forcing your views out into the world and in your power to will on people. But in the end, it's kind of fugazi, right? It's what you make of it. Some people's lives do get destroyed, right? Like their careers get destroyed or things along those lines. And I think that's the part of cancel culture that I think needs to be addressed. But with regard to like actual violence in politics, I kind of go back and forth because I don't want to be a historical narcissist and pretend like we're living in these times that have just never been seen before. When I have an Oma who came here after World War II in Germany, who has seen far worse than I ever could pretend to know here. So that's kind of that's where I stand on that.
Thank you, RJ. Yeah, I'm thinking your answer to that question, talking about how the violence in our political system has been around forever. How much of what we're experiencing now has to do with the fact that we've got so much media so quickly and everywhere. So I think Professor McGrath, you had an answer.
Well, I just wanted to comment. I would echo
Comment.
I echo RJ's thoughts, and understand that violence has been part of our political history. But I would suggest that if it gets out of control, just like it did in the United States Capitol, where 4 police or 6 police officers end up dead, 150 of them are assaulted, that we use our criminal justice system in the same way. If school board members are being threatened and people won't shut up, you drag them out and you throw them in jail. I mean, that's what if a man beats up his wife, there are ramifications, and if violence is being utilized to try to get to a political aim, that's where law enforcement comes in. And I think it is important that people see that people are being over 750 people are being investigated and for the political violence that occurred on January 6th. Well, I think people will have second thoughts about storming the United States Capitol in the future. But I don't see it as necessary. I don't necessarily, newspapers and media are trying to sell papers and get viewerships, and suggesting there's a civil war. My good Trump friends, we're not going to kill each other. And I don't see this happening myself, but I think a lot of it is being, just political rhetoric to a certain degree. And I hope so. I hope I'm right. And if there is violence, we use our criminal justice systems to make sure that people aren't threatened if they're following through on their public responsibilities.
Thank you, Professor McGrath. Who else?
Yes. One of the aspect of violence, I think some of it too comes from the whole adoption of invoking feeling and emotion into politics. Because someone said something that they disagreed with, and they take it as a personal attack, or they feel threatened. And then that gets put out on social media, and then it's the social media aspect in and of itself, I think, has been the degradation of our society in the last couple of years, because people feel so emboldened and free to just say whatever they want without consequence. Whereas if we were anywhere else in the world other than the United States, some of those actions on social media could result in someone coming into your home, removing you from your house, and murdering you in the street, because that really happens. And I think we as an American society think that the whole world is just like us. And they put their blinders on and think that their reality is the only reality that exists. And without being exposed and understanding the differences that happen in other nations, I think we're a little bit ignorant as Americans, and we really take those things for granted.
Thank you, Tanya. Would anyone else like to respond? Yes, Patrick.
So going back to RJ's point, I agree with you that throughout history there's been violence, especially when it comes to some of the political aspects of our history. One of the things I'd say I feel now, and I attribute this to technology a little bit, is that I feel like that we're quicker to jump to violence, and quicker to do it over what seem to be not always the most important things. So I feel like in our history, like you said, there was issues leading up to the Civil War where there was violence in the Capitol and those kind of things. The concept of things getting violent at a Board of Education meeting because of a book that somebody doesn't want read or does want read, or masks and things like that. It seems like that kind of violence, I don't want to say unproductive violence, but the violence for violence sake over matters that should be able to be handled with discourse is more of what I've been seeing more lately. I think when it comes to the big issues, going to war, civil war, those types of things in politics. I think there'll always be the potential for violence. And in the past, there's absolutely been much more than what we'll ever see right now. But it's those little things that should have been able to been handled through conversation and through understanding. For some reason, we just seem to want to jump to, even if it's not physical violence, that outburst or that rage that isn't warranted for the situation.
Thank you, Patrick. Anyone else? Okay, and with that, let me turn it back to Delaney.
Thank you. I'd like to open this question up to anyone for input. So anyone, please feel free to chime in. How do we address uncivil political discourse that happens through social media memes and interactions? And how can we take the discussion offline and into our own communities in more constructive ways?
The best approach, I think, is having opportunities to where you can engage across the aisle. By human nature, we tend to gravitate to people who think and feel and have those shared experiences for us because it makes us feel warm and cozy and cuddly. But it goes back to the education component. And I think exposing people at a younger age, that high school age, consistently to how our political processes work, to where they can gain that confidence that they will want to engage with someone who has a different viewpoint and have these discussions. Anybody who knows me personally knows I'm not afraid to walk into any room, any place, anywhere. Doesn't matter who you are, I'll talk to you. It's just my experiences have given me that confidence. And I try to take opportunities where I can have the opposite side also available to field questions and conversations. And I'm even working on a project now to where I want to have political forums for some of our local races. And I want to have the Democrats and Choose Civility and anyone else in the community willing to partner with the Republican Women's Club to sit on these candidate forums, because we need to ask questions from all sides, because in bipartisan races, they represent everyone. And I think that's where we get to those middle ground, large populations of people to where they say, oh, okay, so this can happen. And we need to be examples of that going forward.
Thank you, Tanya. And you bring up an interesting point that I think has, been highlighted a lot today by all of our speakers, which is it all starts in the classroom at a very young age. And I think that that's very important and definitely needs to, return in some way to, public education. Would anyone else like to chime in on that question?
I would, Delaney, just to kind of get a shot at this.
Sure, Colin, go ahead.
So about being in the classroom, I typically get a lot of perspectives in there more often, just so I can, I guess, start an open discussion. And especially going to social media, that's where I'll kind of talk about it privately with my family, because they're more immune to this. And I think being more open is what I am trying to, or what I would love to kind of get more of, because I don't know much about this, but I would just like to be more into the discussions. And in the classroom, I definitely try to educate myself and help educate some of my classmates who may not know much about this, or just to get a better understanding of where we are and how it can affect us positively or negatively. And yeah, the classroom would be a place where I definitely hear more about this and get a better insight to this than anywhere else.
I'm going to ask a question, Colin, about that, just to kind of help think about the connection back to social media a little bit more. Are you on social media?
Yeah, I typically go to Facebook a lot, because a lot of my friends and I will kind of, I guess, privately discuss from time to time.
So you have certain things you post on there and that you kind of go back and forth discussing things through the posts?
Yeah, but I'm very picky with what I post because I don't want to post something that would offend or give anyone the wrong impression. So I kind of just am very picky about what I post and what I say on there to my friends because I don't want to give them a wrong message of something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's kind of, I think, a strategy that you're using that others might be able to use is to kind of bring some of those conversations that aren't constructive back into talking with your, friends, talking within the classroom and talking with family, because, it is hard to talk about politics on social media. Right.
Yeah.
So that's maybe if you want to just kind of rephrase that in a way that summarizes your thoughts on that, because the question is really about, how do we address when people are doing, sharing things kind of without thinking about what other people think and not, they don't care if they stir up fighting or emotions. So, how do we deal with that? Because it's happening so much.
I feel like we should care because whatever you say or post, people are going to see it and they're going to either get the wrong impression. They're just like going to be really ticked off. So you got to you got to think before you act, which a lot of people do not do. And I feel like a lot of people, especially like younger people who have an opinion about this kind of a thing, you have got to think before you act because if you don't, you're going to have a lot of people come at you and you're going to get a really bad result and it's going to be staying with you until you either fix it or say something put it at a better, less mean or aggressive way than whatever, because people will tend to get aggressive and you have to kind of really say it in a good way or either don't say it at all. So I think a lot of people have just you got to be more selective on social media. Think before you act, think about what you post, and don't be so like aggressive with whatever you're trying to say or get at, because there's no problem with talking in a nice calm manner where you can just sit down, have a nice chat without having to go off like a bomb with yelling or making an aggressive comment or statement about anything political on social media.
That was awesome.
If I could jump in here, I think I really agree with some of the things Tanya has been saying in regards to really focusing on education. And to me, I learned early on in my political career, you don't put things in writing. And it kind of echoes what Colin is saying is that, let's face it, who are you going to convince on Facebook by trying to convince them that you're right on some political issue? Frankly, nobody. But meanwhile, they're creating themselves a kind of a history of who they are on this platform that God knows where it's going to go. And every job into the future, some employer is going to be looking at social media posts. And most young people don't understand the ramifications of putting things in writing. You're creating yourself a record. And I think there's a real cavalier sort of lack of understanding of what some of these things could potentially do to harm their future. And I think young people are missing that. They would post their most intimate thoughts or bombastically trying to accuse the other side of some malfeasance without really thinking, are they actually doing anything here? Are they going to convince anybody here? Are they going to make the world a better place? And so fundamentally, I think it comes to educating our young people, especially, to be cautious about social media and to stay away from it. And frankly, if you're going to, like what Colin said too, is like in the classroom, he listens and he can hear different viewpoints and so forth. It's a much richer sort of platform to hear different viewpoints and understand their viewpoints rather than some sort of comment that's meant to create reaction that's not changing anyone's minds.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to, I mean, we've been talking a lot about a lot of the negative things, right? And I think to your point, Dr. Rominsky earlier, was that we haven't been like, there hasn't been a whole lot of like prescriptive things, except for now we started getting into education. How are we going to start educating folks to be more civically minded and to be in a better spot? Kind of reminds me of what Alan Bloom talked about, the fact that everybody's going to college already thinking of themselves as a Socrates. And James Madison warned us that if every Athenian had been a Socrates, then every Athenian assembly would have been a mob, right? And here we are now, and it's all a mob because we've got a bunch of people who think that they're Socrates. So how do we fix that, right? And first is obviously through education. Secondly is to get off of social media, right? And this is coming from me, which is probably like not the thing that I should be saying, right? As you know, having worked in digital media. But if you want to have the like, use social media, but use social media for things to that bring goodness to your life. Talk to your family members you don't get to see, talk to your friends that you don't see, that you haven't seen since you've been in college or since, you know, since other days. Share pictures of food, share pictures of your life, have fun with it, like make it fun again. Make social media fun again. But I can't even make that joke, right? Because then some people might get mad because it sounds too much like Make America Great Again. But make social media fun again. And have these important conversations with people in person. Because as Chris Rock found out, like you're probably going to hold back a little bit on your jokes if there's a chance that you're going to get smacked in the face. And in the end, I think that a lot of us would hold back on the types of things that we would say to somebody on social media when we're behind the keyboard, when you're looking dead center at somebody and you say something that is going to elicit some sort of reaction, whether or not that's an emotional reaction, you see it in their eyes, or whether or not they sock, you know, in the words of Bill Buckley, they sock you in the goddamn mouth and you stay plastered. You have to have that accountability to a degree, and social media has taken that accountability away. And if we want to have real genuine discussions, besides here where we've obviously had great discussions and nobody is near one another and we don't have to worry about whether or not Patrick's going to punch me or anything, you know, in the end, having conversations with people like this and not behind a keyboard is really going to be the prescriptive element to make sure that like we have those, we reestablish those connections that we've all been talking about and that we're all longing for, is that sense of community again.
Thank you, RJ, and thank you to Colin and Professor McGrath as well for, you know, speaking to that question. I think you all raise a really great point about personal gain and personal incentive on social media and how that can also be positive for the community, which obviously ties back to everything that we've talked about today. I personally want to thank all of our speakers, but I will go ahead and pass it over to Dr. Rominsky to do the closing.
Thank you, Delaney. And thank you all for being part of the second Choose Civility podcast, set to broadcast on the Day of Civility in Allegheny County on April 7th, 2022. Be sure to go to the Bottom Line and the Hustings online to read how this conversation continues. Consider how you can engage in your own political discourse through one of the avenues of civic engagement that Frostburg State offers, that our partners offer, and that our region provides. What will you do now that you've heard this discussion? We hope that you'll join us for the Day of Civility events this year, including the hashtag Chalk It Up to Civility and hashtag Bobcats Against Bias social media campaigns. Go to the Allegheny County Library website or the Frostburg State University website and check out those opportunities. We'll have presentations, panel discussions, and debates about topics ranging from memes and misinformation to civil social media influencing and debating the value of higher education. So please join us and choose civility.